Okay, so I was asked to come here today to join this webinar to give a presentation on the topic of autistic self-advocacy and our influence on policy. And yeah, I've picked the questions: where do we stand and where do we need to go? Okay, if anything with the sound or the image is not right, tell me please, huh? If you can't hear me or something. So, who am I and why am I giving this presentation here to you? My name is Florian Sanden and I work in policy professionally at the European Network on Independent Living, ENIL. I have not been working at ENIL since 2016, but I have been working in a variety of positions since 2016. Which positions? I'm going a little bit into detail in this to give you an overview over the type of advocacy organizations and groups which are out there. So my first workstation was at an umbrella of organizations. It was called, or it is called, it still very much exists, the German Social Welfare Organizations, and it was policy work on social topics. My second workstation, I worked for a mixed bag of Catholic organizations, and it was about education and youth policy. And since 2022, I'm at the European Network on Independent Living, and it is all about disability. What are these organizations? To go a little bit into this. So the German social welfare organizations are an umbrella, among others, of Caritas and the Red Cross and several other organizations. This is a really large group. In Germany, they are the biggest employer together. They employ 1.7 million people, run 105,000 facilities, run 30% of all social services, and have very strong, very professionalized lobby activities. Just German Caritas runs a secretariat of 300 employees who are mostly engaged in advocacy work. Then the Catholic organizations were quite a bit smaller, providers of non-formal youth and adult education, quite a large number of participants too. Despite the shrinking of the church, these organizations are still very large, represent 660,000 young people, a lot of facilities. When it comes to advocacy work, not so strong. And I have to say it was rather boring because in youth policy, non-formal youth work, not a lot happens. And now ENIL, the European Network on Independent Living, it is a disabled people's organization. So it is a self-advocacy organization like UCAP, but it is cross-disability. So it represents all impairments, individual members, and mostly small grassroots organizations. And it conducts quite a proactive and committed policy work, but on quite a small scale. So it is a small secretariat. And UCAP is a member of ENIL. So now I go back a step and ask, what is policy and what is advocacy work? Because these can be such large, mysterious terms. And excuse me. There's a large variety of definitions, but a simple definition is policy is the decisions, laws, rules, and standards which are the outcome of politics. An example is the EU Employment Equality Directive from the year 2000, which banned discrimination on the grounds of disability in employment. This is an example for a policy. And what is advocacy work and how is it linked? In brief, advocacy work are activities designed to influence politics and policies. So these are two aspects very closely linked together. Now the question, advocacy work policy, how does this work? This is quite an extensive topic, but to give a very brief overview. So advocacy work, the basics. To understand this, we have to go a bit into political theory. So the way political systems are set up, there is always a division of powers. Here I found this nice graphic example about the US political system. The French philosopher Baron de Montesquieu came up with this at first. There's always a legislative power, so a parliament which adopts the laws. There is the executive which implements the laws, and there is the judicial power which is there to resolve conflicts and interpret the law. So the division of powers into three tiers. In the EU context, how to translate this? In the EU context, the entity, the legislative part, the one, adopting the laws, it is two parts. It is the Council of the EU, which represents the national governments. It is made up of national governments, and the European Parliament, which is made out of parliamentarians, which you can elect directly. It's a direct representation of citizens. The Council of the EU you can elect when in your country, you vote for a parliament, and the parliament constitutes a government, and this government is then in the Council of the EU. This two-chamber system, it is very typical for political systems. You also have this in the US Congress, for example, the House of Representatives, which are directly elected parliamentarians. The Senate is also directly elected in this case. I should have picked a better example. In other countries, for example, in Germany, the second chamber again represents governments and not directly elected parliamentarians. So, the EU political system here, because the European Union was originally, and still is, it is an organization founded and run by national governments. And so a chamber which represents national governments. So these two, they adopt the laws. The executive part, the one who's in charge of implementing legislation, is the European Commission. Then we have the judicial power, the Court of Justice, which resolves conflict. And we still have a couple of others, but they're not so important in this context, like the European Central Bank, the Court of Auditors. This is not so relevant in this context. So, and now advocacy work. How does this relate to this setup of a political system? Okay. I was a bit too quick. So the legislative process, this is very relevant for policy because, this is what we want to influence. How does this work? In simple, the European Commission proposes legislation, and the European Parliament and the Council, they adopt it and turn it into a law. So far, so easy. Then advocacy groups, they are, well, there is a debate to which extent they are part of a political system. And they certainly, some constitutions explicitly say that advocacy groups or interest groups, that they have a legitimate role, but they're not really, not officially part of the system. So there is no formal role usually. They come in from outside and try to influence. To make it a bit more complicated, this is of course very simplified. To make it a bit more complicated, the legislative process, how can you divide it up? There's always a pre-legislative phase before anything is proposed. This is basically going on all the time. There's always a low-level debate going on, yeah, between people, but also between people who do this professionally, but also citizens. Which laws should be changed? Do we need new laws for something? At certain points, which points precisely is a mystery in and of itself. I don't know how well this is researched, but at certain point, the executive, the Commission in this context, proposes legislation. The European Parliament and the EU Council both prepare the versions of the legislation they would like to see. Then they have to try to find a compromise, following by adoption, following by implementation by the Commission and or the member states. Often the European Commission is a very small administration. Most of the times it is the member states who have to implement legislation. And when we go back, when we link this to advocacy work, basically when we want to influence, each of these steps presents a chance for intervention. To give you an example, a campaign for the right to legal capacity we are running at ENIL. The concrete subject is a so-called regulation on the protection of vulnerable adults. How can the process, which stages have been completed already? Where do we stand here? The proposal was presented in autumn 2023. For us as ENIL, as advocacy people, the first step was to read it and to assess and build a position. And we saw that very quickly that the regulation would lead to dangerous restrictions of legal capacity. So we adopted a defensive stance and to try to prevent the adoption in the original form. Then the second step, in the European Parliament, when the legislation reaches the Parliament, it is assigned to a committee, which the work in the Parliament takes place in committees, which focus on specific subject areas. So a committee is assigned, and MEPs, so members, parliamentarians, which have the job of writing a version the Parliament wants to support. In the EU Council, these are called working groups who do the same thing. What did we do? How did we intervene? So you write position papers where you write down your demands, the problems you see, the demands you have for change, and you give arguments. We had 2 rounds, so we were very active on this. We had 2 rounds of submissions of position papers. One paper between EDE and UCAP together, and then we managed to involve more organizations, the European Disability Forum, Mental Health Europe, Inclusion Europe, and Age Platform, which was an important step. We had several meetings with the European Parliament rapporteurs. We had meetings with national governments, a roundtable with national governments, and we managed to acquire the support of the United Nations. With all this together, it was possible to have so far, well, a relatively positive outcome. The European Parliament supports the substantial changes we proposed. It supports the proposal to get substituted decision-making out and replace it by supported decision-making, which would actually lead to additional rights in exercising legal capacity. So far, the problem is that the member states, the national governments, and the EU Council don't support to completely switch. They rather would prefer to have both pillars, substituted decision-making and supported decision-making. More has not happened yet. The additional steps are pending. So yeah, these were how the policy-making process works in theory and an example. Now, I was asked to present a bit what role do autistic self-advocates play. This is really hard to quantify. I can here just say what I observe. So we have UCAP involved to a certain extent, which is, of course, UCAP is thus far a volunteer-based organization, if I haven't missed anything. So there are no full-time staff who do policy work yet, so far. This might change. Then in here we have 7 or 8 members of full-time staff. Not all do policy work. We have also communications and projects. We are small but proactive and committed, but often relatively isolated in our positions. Then there is, of course, the European Disability Forum, and UCAP members are also there active as volunteers in certain committees. I'm not aware of any staff at EDF who is autistic. I should have probably, I kind of forgot to say this. This is kind of important. I'm autistic too. So the policy coordinator at ENIL is an autistic self-advocate. Then we have Autism Europe. There might be different opinions about this, especially at Autism Europe. But for me, this is not a real self-advocacy organization. And honestly, their policy work is of really little substance. It barely exists. Then what about the EU institutions itself? Like I have, but maybe I just don't know about enough. I met a person once works at the European Commission who's autistic. In the parliament, I have heard rumors sometimes that MP or not maybe autistic. I think there was one who was very likely autistic until 2024, but wasn't re-elected. In the Council of the EU, we have a UCAP member involved, Alistair from Malta, who is head of disability in the Maltese Ministry for Inclusion and the voluntary sector, and as such is involved in the working groups in the EU Council. So he's really, really closely involved. So for me, the conclusion, our role so far, I think there's room for improvement. So I feel there is a greater need to go in a different direction, but to highlight the need that we need to see that we professionalize further. Yeah, so I would really use this presentation for a call for professionalization. And what do I mean by this? So we need to increase the number of autistic professionals in advocacy organizations, also increase the number of autistic professionals in public administration, and increase the number of autistic self-advocates in politics. What we probably also could do more is try to network with those who are already involved, because it might very well be that there are more we are just not aware of, or which are not aware themselves that they're autistic, or well, don't want to make it known. But yeah, with this presentation, I want to propose yeah, certain pathways how these increases are possible. So you have probably noticed very quickly that advocacy work, it is quite complicated. It very quickly starts to make your head spin. And indeed, you do need to do it well. It is difficult to fully do it. Um, yeah, as a hobby. To do it well, it is a profession. Of course, volunteers are important too, and have an important role to supplement, um, um, and also yeah, be active as volunteers in boards or in yeah, in committees that EDF or ENIL offer. But I want to, in this presentation, highlight professional pathways to work on this professionally. So some areas of knowledge which it requires quite a good knowledge of how politics works, the EU political system, European law, advocacy methods, which is a field of itself, and of course the subject matter, so autism and disability. Of course, yeah, if you want to do advocacy work on those topics, if you want to work on railway or the environment, then of course you need to have a knowledge of these subjects. So, but also certain, so these are more hard skills, but also certain soft skills. You need a good amount of proactivity, also creativity, because the methods which are best used are not always obvious. Um, Different situations require different approaches. So you also need a certain endurance, especially if you do disability rights or human rights, because yeah, you are confronted with all the things which are going wrong all the time, and successes can be small and hard to come by. So if you're defeated or give up easily, yeah, this might not be such a good field. Networking, capacity for networking, and a little bit also, let's say, a passion for making plans, for plotting and scheming. Yeah, there are certainly more, but these are some of the most important, and we can also later discuss a bit how being autistic complicates some of these things, or especially the networking bit. If you're supposed to network in a mostly neurotypical environment, not an easy feat, I can tell you. So Honestly, also how to acquire those skills. Honestly, the best way is you study you study political science, European studies, public or European law. There are concrete universities which I would recommend for this. Then, ideally, you train after your studies in like an apprenticeship. For example, you can do European Solidarity Corps volunteering at ENIL, and we will train you. I'm refining my skills on doing that. And also some volunteering does not hurt, for example, with UCAP or an organization you're already active. Yeah. So there are certain degree programs which give you a really good base knowledge about, well, if you want to work on the EU, yes, just focus on the EU level. Of course, if you want to do advocacy work in your country, then there are different programs. But yeah, certain degree programs which give you a really good knowledge on the European Union. For example, Maastricht University in the Netherlands has excellent programs here. The Bachelor Studies program in European Studies. They have two master programs in European Studies. One 1-year master with yeah, more practical approach, and the research program. So yeah, I did the research program at Maastricht University, and yeah, it's can really recommend it. Also law. So I did the political science approach, but yeah, law is also really helpful. Um, then there's always a bit of rivalry going on. There's also the College of Europe. Yeah, they also offer a variety of programs on this. And then at ENIL, we regularly offer European Solidarity Corps positions, I think once a year. Um, and yeah, always two volunteer positions. It's half a year, I think. Yeah, traveling and also expenses are paid accommodation. Um, Traveling to Brussels, accommodation. Yeah, they take place in Brussels. The internships. You also get some pocket money. Yeah, I think it's also possible to pay a personal assistant. Yeah, certainly a good internship for opportunity for a young person. Um, Also increasing the number of autistic professionals working in EU public administration. There I can't say as much because, well, I don't do that. But there is a test, there is a competition or many competitions which take place regularly. It's called the European Personal Selection Office concours. Here, any degree or professional experience actually works. Well, and you have to pass the test. Recently, they have changed it a bit, so which might actually be an advantage for autistic people. In the past, it was very generalist oriented, but they changing this, and this is more. Um, yeah, they're looking more for specialists, really specialists for certain topics. So yeah, if you have a deep interest of yeah, they looking for specialists in almost any area of knowledge there is. So if you have a really deep interest of something, um, and yeah, the test it's really focused on recognizing. So it's really about abstract thinking, recognizing patterns. It is not uninteresting actually. But also increase the number of autistic self-advocates in politics. It is a big problem for us that we are always approaching mostly from the outside of the political system. We also need to get more people to the inside. And for this, any education and professional background works. Or also, yeah, having no university degree or anything. Counterintuitively, yeah, formal qualifications are not as important. Here's a certain threshold here because it can be difficult or daunting to do this on your own. Here we need to yeah, develop approaches, I find. My recommendation is if you're interested in this, find like-minded individuals and go together, join as a group. Also intuitively on the local level, it is actually not very difficult to get elected into a position at the local party group or actually in the municipality. I never got elected into anything, but for a while at university, I was active in a local party group, and they are at the local level. They are often really desperate, actually, to find people who want to do something. So showing up regularly and saying some more or less things that make sense are often enough to get you elected into something after a while. So the most important item is time, really. Okay, and that also already was my presentation. So I'm fully aware that of what I have said is not at all easy to implement, but that is what I see is the most needed, really. So for me, the question is, so how can we support autistic individuals to get through such a degree program? How can we support autistic individuals to get them to do a solidarity core at INEA? How can we support autistic individuals to pass the EPSO? Or how can we support autistic individuals to become active in a political party? We might not be able to solve this question now, but we should start thinking in this direction. Also, my question to you, has any one of you ever thought of any of those actions or would be interested in any of them?